And it seems to me it's also a question of time span. I mean, you mentioned indigenous people, and I think they easily think in hundreds of years, in thousands of years, and they have the experience. While as we learned in a political process to think in 4 years terms, that's
right.
a long term. Or also as consumers, we expect immediate satisfaction, immediate buying, being able to buy things. And since climate change is here, but it's not that bad at this moment, people may be still hoping that, well, it will pass, it will only be a phase. When, for example, you see that for the last 12 years, Australia is basically in a permanent drought, for example.
Yeah, well, the bushfires were caused by 12 years of drought. There's cities like Perth that are running out of water, and they're building, desalination plants. Nobody's even talking about Adelaide, and apparently Adelaide, where they've just recently had 40-degree days, day after day, is in a major water crisis. And again, it's not talked about. So there's this feeling like everything's fine. And I think part of Australia is there's also this idea of the lucky country, that we're going to be okay, because in the past it's been okay. So it does create a limit, but it feels to me what these Aboriginal elders were saying is that unless we really take this seriously and look at our relationships, because they were saying that our relationship to the land and how we treat the land is how the land treats us. And that it's really a reciprocal, and this is a very social ecology idea too, based on systems theory, that how we treat the land, it treats us. And if we're not taking it seriously and nurturing and looking after it, it's not going to look after us.
With the addition that how we treat our earth on one side might affect people on the other side. So the feedback is not always immediately there.
That's right. And that's a very good point, because systems theory is very much based, and ecology is based on feedback. And that's the difficulty, is how you make that feedback effective when it is like that, when you have Pacific Islands or countries like Bangladesh suffering, while, people in parts of Sydney are living very well, thank you. And, why should they change this sort of thing?
Well, I think there's the concept of environmental capital, which might answer quite a few questions and show from a market perspective, it's just the biggest market failure you could possibly imagine, that you just ignore all the environmental impact. But would you say that if we factor in environmental impacts, then we might also regard people and their lifestyles through a different perspective, and that could lead to honoring people who are protecting their native forests they're living in? Or how could that change society, this concept?
Well, I think that's a very important point, and I mean, even like in the UK, it was the Stern report that said it's going to cost billions of dollars, that really got politicians moving. And we've had a similar report here in Australia, and it did make some impact. But I think that in the long term, one of the positive sides too is what's called green marketing, where people are realising that while as the environmental issues of particularly alternative energy, I mean, I've heard people from the coal union saying there's 3 jobs in alternative energy for every job in coal. And that was at a climate change demonstration in Syndney a few months ago. And I was really surprised, because the coal unions, I was being told, were one of the groups resisting this. And quite obviously from the speaker it wasn't true entirely, because a lot of alternative energy is much more labour intensive, so it can create jobs. And I know an organisation called Get Up that do a lot of online lobbying. That's what they're promoting, is green jobs. That there's a lot of possibility for using this as a stimulus to develop, a much greener economy. And a lot of ethical investment seems to be working in that direction. So there is some very positive signs there, I think.
Absolutely.